My name is Lou Sheppard. I'm an artist. That's such a strange thing to be. I think that means that I'm somebody who is really trying to pay attention to spaces and things outside of what sort of immediately able to see and hear. My work is usually responsive to places. I usually go to places to make work, or I sort of imagine how to work in relation to a space. I really think about sort of places and what happens in places and how to kind of bring attention to those spaces. So, for example, I've done work about the Antarctic coastline, like really old work, where I was trying to think about the shifting shape of the Antarctic coastline and sort of like the way that the ice was changing there, and I wanted to reimagine it as a musical score so they could kind of hear some of the difference and hear some of the data, or like sort of like hear kind of what it actually feel like more than what it actually just is. A couple of years ago, I finished a project working in northern Estonia in an abandoned mine, and thinking about the mine and the sort of like sonic resonance of the mine, and thinking about the ways that these abandoned spaces kind of give us an opportunity to think outside of extractive relationships, or sort of like think outside of capitalist relationships to land. Yeah, and then recently I made worked in at the Banff Center to make this piece about listening and how to listen, and sort of framing time and experiences of time in that space through a way of queer listening. So yeah, that's who I am.
We've been listening to the voice of Lou Sheppard, a Nova Scotia-based artist and sound practitioner. Lou's work focuses on climate crisis, loss, queer bodies, and ecologies, and he is the featured artist on this month's episode of Ears Have Eyes, launching the first in our multi-month theme, Devices for Listening, Sound Sculptures and Sculptural Sounds. You're tuned in to CJSW 90.9 FM, broadcasting from Treaty 7 territory, home to the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, and Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. You can also hear Ears Have Eyes on New Adventures in Sound Art in South River, Ontario, and Golden Co-op Radio in beautiful British Columbia. We're your hosts, Caitlin Brown
and Wayne Garrett. For our April and May episodes, we're diving into listening devices, sound sculptures, and the objects that mediate the sounds that surround us. Devices for Listening highlights artists who build sonic installations, deep listeners who use devices for amplification, visual artists who work with sound recordings as material, and composers experimenting with the aesthetics of sound. Our main theme was inspired by an ongoing exhibition at the Banff Center called Listening Devices.
My name is Jacqueline Bell. I'm the curator at Walter Phillips Gallery at Banff Center for Arts and Creativity, and I'm excited to be able to share a little bit about the exhibition Listening Devices that launched last summer. The exhibition is comprised of both audio works as well as score-based works, some of which are a part of the permanent collection at Banff Center and others which are on long-term loan. The launch of the exhibition also coincided with a multi-day event called Gather Listen Here that was centered on ideas of sound and land, and a number of events that related to the works and listening devices took place at that time.
I have had a long relationship with the Banff Center. I've been there as a work study, and then came back as an artist multiple times in different programs. And then so I knew Jacqueline, and I knew sort of the space quite well. And uh, and when Jacqueline asked me to come and think about creating a work in relation to the space, I knew that I wanted to uh, kind of make something that really reflected the experience of being there. I think it's been so important to so many artists, among other like many people, like this the space of Banff itself, but to so many artists, I think that that very space and that sort of like spending time in that place has been so foundational. So I wanted to make something that was really about the site itself and sort of about the experience of this of the space itself. Jacqueline also had said, we have this amphitheater. I know you've been interested in amphitheaters recently. I had just spent some time in Greece, really incredibly like looking at amphitheaters there and thinking about these kind of and this the time I've spent in abandoned mines, thinking about these kind of like spaces that are created that do kind of become like places of listening, like places that collect sound like through their shape and then sort of amplify sound through their shape, and then also spaces that like we assemble to listen in. And so thinking about an amphitheater as both this kind of like sonic phenomena, but then also a kind of political phenomena, like a space of gathering and a space of attention. So I really wanted to really like think about the amphitheater itself as this and the bowl that's created by Bow Valley as a kind of like echo of that amphitheater shape, this kind of like gathering sonic gathering space.
Lou Sheppard's work was on view in the amphitheater last summer, in 2024. And a graphic score was made and was available for visitors who are in the amphitheater to be able to take with them and experience in the space. That piece was printed as a risograph and it would be experienced by visitors alongside the 7 channel kind of installation in the space of the amphitheater itself.
I'd made a piece in 2018, I think, I had been staying on the shores of the Scarborough Bluffs in Doris McCarthy's old house, which was like really incredible. There's a residency where you can go and stay in her house on the Scarborough Bluffs, and I was there for a month and a half. Um, and I was listening every day to the birds that were singing all around her house. Doris McCarthy was a big birder. She, in her diaries, every day, it's like noted what birds she was hearing. It's like really, really beautiful, or what birds she saw. So she'll be like, saw a cardinal, saw this duck, saw this, so on. So I was going through and kind of seeing this, and I wanted to think about birdsong, um, like sort of the loss of birdsong in the environment as a way of sort of charting environmental change or climate change. Actually, that's work that I started at Banff Center in 2017. Like I'd been there. Um, I've been there and I had taken endangered bird songs and transcribed them into sonographs, which are sort of sound pictures, and then I'd used the laser cutter at BAM Center to cut them out of paper. So there were these sort of like negative spaces of these sonographs of these like threatened bird species. And so I came to the Doris McCarthy residency and was listening to all of this birdsong and thinking about the way that, birdsong does kind of track environmental change. And, like birds are intimately related to like insect population. And so when there's less insects, there's less bird song. And when there's less insects, that means that your water quality is probably threatened. And, so like all of these sort of minute changes that we're not able to necessarily see, we can hear through what we can't hear in the environment, where we don't hear that bird song. Like at this residency, I was every day waking up in the morning to like this sort of rhythm of like robins singing and then thrushes singing and then like other like sparrows would come in and like all of these kind of birds would come in these very particular ways. And so I'd hear this sort of like repeated pattern of birdsong, and I think the cardinals at a certain point would start, and then everybody would be like kind of like chorusing along in what is called the dawn chorus, say maybe at like 5 or 6 in the morning, and then everybody would get really quiet and a hawk would screech, and then like the hawk would pass by and then everybody would like come back in, and the chorus was sort of, I realized that it was a sort of like organized symphony. There was this kind of like rhythm, and it wasn't just a random birdsong. It was like actually quite composed in a way. And because I was like there by myself, I was like really listening and kind of sinking into the space, and like I could sort of like start to hear like, oh, that's a robin, that's like a nuthatch, that's a so and so. And so I kind of started to know the birds, and I was thinking about this idea of the dawn chorus and the way that the dawn chorus would have changed from the time that Doris McCarthy was listening to it till I was listening to it some like sort of 60 years later. And then, thinking about, well, will there be a dawn chorus, and like what will it sound like in say 20 years or 30 years, So I tracked all of the birds that I was hearing, and I translated all of their songs into sonograms or spectrograms. Spectrograms, not sonograms, but and then I used those to compose a graphic score of the dawn chorus for sort of the shore of Lake Ontario. And then I was talking to someone who was sort of the caretaker of that space, and she was saying, you know, in the evening, the bird song really changes too. It changes in such a different way. And she was kind of talking about this experience of walking through the woods in the evening. And I started to listen at the evening, and of course, like things get so much softer and sort of more melodious just as the birds are kind of like wrapping up their day and going quiet for the night. And so I made a companion, sort of like a second piece called Evensong that was based on the bird song in the evening. And so the two pieces were kind of composed as graphic scores, and I was able to figure them through like I actually don't play many instruments very well. I'm like really more of a more of a visual composer, but I was able to kind of hear them a little bit, and then I took them to a pianist, and she played them as like piano works. And from that I was able to compose these two sort of piano compositions called Dawn Chorus and Evensong. And that became the basis of an installation for the Toronto Biennial in 2018, 19, I can't quite remember. So that piece, like that sort of idea of, listening and kind of framing our listening through dawn and evening, and this idea of sort of like loss and change in the environment. I wanted to bring that kind of frame to the piece at Banff Center, but I wanted to shift away from this idea of sort of just documenting spaces of loss, and like documenting these kind of dawn and even evening spaces as like spaces of possibility, and sort of thinking, like beyond this idea of environmental loss and sort of like mourning, like more like what actually can happen in those sort of transitory spaces, or these spaces of like uncertainty. I've been thinking a lot about dawn and evening as these kind of queer times of day, and these kind of moments between sort of day and night, in like a very practical way, like a sort of like, transitional moment, but then also as this kind of like queer temporality, or this sort of like time outside of, say, a like dominant time, or a kind of like a way of sort of moving outside of time.
You're tuned in to Ears Have Eyes on CJSW 90.9 FM, New Adventures in Sound Art, and Golden Co-op Radio. We're listening to Lou Sheppard describing concepts around his sound installation, Dawn Chorus, Evensong, Bow River Valley, at the Banff Center last summer. This site-specific soundwork was commissioned by curator Jacqueline Bell for the Walter Phillips Gallery, and originally played at dawn and dusk in the outdoor amphitheater on Sleeping Buffalo Mountain.
Lou Sheppard works in interdisciplinary audio, performance, and installation-based practices. He has performed and exhibited across Canada, notably at the Art Gallery of York University, the Confederation Centre for the Arts, Charlottetown, Plug-in ICA, Winnipeg, Toronto Biennial, Kumu Kunstmuseum Estonia, the Antarctic Biennial, and at Titanic Gallery in Finland. Lou has participated in numerous residencies, including the International Studio Curatorial Program in Brooklyn, the Cité des Arts, Paris, and as a participant and faculty at the Banff Center. He has been longlisted for the Sobey Art Award in 2018, 2020, and 2021, and was the winner of the Tinashen Foundation Emerging Atlantic Artist Residency in 2017.
Lou has mixed an abbreviated version of Dawn Chorus Evensong, specifically for Ears Have Eyes. We're going to play this 20-minute excerpt from his work, and then return to our interview with Lou and Jacqueline, learn about the visual score that accompanied the sound work, and set the stage for our next episode, Part 2 of Devices for Listening, Sound Sculptures and Sculptural Sounds. This is Dawn Chorus Evensong, Bow River Valley, by Lou Sheppard.
I really wanted to think about like the idea of kind of coming into focus or coming into listening and then like kind of moving out into a space of like sort of away from like an idea of like sort of a human-centered listening and into a kind of more like responsive engagement with the sound that's in the environment. So I wanted to think about the idea of the geophony and the biophony of Banff. The biophony is like it's like the way that all of the sounds in the environment, all the sounds made by living things are relating to each other and are sort of pitching and composing themselves in relation to each other so that they can be both like heard and concealed. And so I was kind of working from this idea that I'd heard, and now I've forgotten his name, but it'll come back to me. But Krauss, Bernie Krauss, I think is his name.
House.
He was recording in the woods. Like, he was recording over like years and years in this like sound in the woods, and he was recording this group of frogs over the course of a few years, and sort of like recording the sounds that they were making and listening to them. And at a certain point, this like airlines, or at least like the military, started testing airplanes over the frogs, and like over their habitat, and the frog population was like really suddenly over the course of a year or two was like really diminished. And the frogs, what was happening is the frogs would all sing in unison together, and they would sort of be able to evade predators because they were all sort of singing in unison together. And so they were able to kind of signal to each other, but they were able to, like, no predator was able to kind of listen to that and know where one individual frog was, which is like such a beautiful metaphor for being a human in the world and how we can kind of work together to keep each other safe. He realized that the airplanes were throwing the frogs out of sync with each other. So the airplanes would go over and the frogs would come out of sync with each other, and then they would be heard by predators and be like sort of picked off one by one. And until, yeah, the frog population was totally diminished. I was really thinking about that question and, this sort of idea of coming together and sort of sounding together, and then also like the way that that can kind of support us and sort of connect us, and the way that it also can conceal us. And so, or that was sort of the starting point of the piece, and sort of how I came to the idea. Yeah. And the sound is all composed from voices. It's all composed from queer voices. And I often work with queer performers. Uh, and in this case, they are singing these kind of, they're not singing together, they're singing sort of separately, these sort of different prompts and these different processes. And then I'm mixing them. And bringing them together in these different relationships. So the sound is meant to be at times like sort of overwhelming, at times a bit uncomfortable, and at times like really sort of almost like kind of euphoric in a way. I really was pushing against the idea of like tune, like being in tune. I really wanted to push the notes like beyond the space of like this sounds in tune to say like, well, where does our sort of conceptions of like being in tune or being out of tune come from? And if we are out of tune with something, or we are sort of like out of resonance with something, like that does feel accurate to the way that we're living in relation to the world. So there's moments that can feel kind of like jarring or uncomfortable, and then there's moments that I think, especially towards the dusk score, really speak to that idea of coming back into tune or coming back into alignment or kind of coming sort of back into harmony. And so yeah, the sound, if there's no words in it, but it is all vocal and it is sort of imagining to the idea that these queer bodies are sort of like almost like leading us in and out of that space. So sort of a way of guiding in and out of space and imagining a sort of like futurity of that space and sort of a futurity that like queerness can speak to in a way. So yeah.
You are listening to Ears Have Eyes on CJSW 90.9 FM, New Adventures in Sound Art, and Golden Co-op Radio. We've been hearing from Lou Sheppard, the Nova Scotia-based sound artist behind Dawn Chorus, Evensong, Bow River Valley, the centerpiece of today's episode. The theme of our show today is Devices for Listening, Part 1. Every month, Ears of Eyes features sound art, experimental music, spoken word, field recordings, and noise from local, national, and international artists. All the works on our program are submitted by artists responding to a specific theme or curated directly by our team of 2. You can learn more about the artists on the show and submit your own sound art to upcoming themes by visiting our website, hibernationproject.ca, and finding the tab Ears Have Eyes.
This month, we've structured our program around one artist and curator, Jacqueline Bell of the Walter Phillips Gallery at the Banff Centre, and artist Lou Sheppard, as they discuss Listening Devices, the ongoing exhibition at Banff Centre that inspired today's theme.
My name is Jacqueline Bell. I'm the curator at Walter Phillips Gallery at Banff Center for Arts and Creativity. Listening Devices is an exhibition that is intended to be long-term, and the exhibition is really centered around score-based works as well as audio works. Some of those pieces are in the permanent collection at Banff Center, and other works are on long-term loan. Lou Sheppard's work in Listening Devices is the graphic score that was available in the amphitheater during the exhibition. And if you're at Banff Center, you can head on up to the Paul D. Fleck Library and Archives. And during open hours, you're able to actually spend time with the graphic score in that space. And Lou, I'm wondering if maybe would you share a little bit about the graphic score itself and the relationship between kind of the imagery and then the text on the back?
Yeah, for sure. I work with graphic scores. That's sort of my starting point for most of my sound work is to start with graphic scores. I like to think about sound happening in a space rather than like the sound that will happen in a space. And sound kind of like bounces and radiates and amplifies and shifts and interacts with all spaces. And so in this way, it gives us almost like an imprint of a space. And it of course also like bounces and radiates and impacts our bodies and is impacted by our bodies. And so I like to think about how a graphic score can define a space for an action to happen within, and in this case, like the action of listening at dawn and dusk to happen within. So the score itself is it's sort of got a background of the topographic sort of lines of the mountains that I was working with, and this kind of idea of the acoustic bowl of the Bow Valley. And it also is like kind of set against this gradient moving from dawn to dusk, uh, and back to, or sort of dusk to dawn to dusk, I guess. Blue to pink to blue. Um, on it, there's a few different symbols. There's kind of six different symbols, or sort of like groups of symbols. And the symbols are defining different processes of listening, or kind of like cueing you to different, like different practices or different sort of like activities of listening, and different kind of ways of participating within the sounds that are already happening. So there's kind of a series of symbols that define the tectonic shifts that happened to create the mountains themselves. So the kind of like going way back to sort of like when the mountains were emerging from the earth, and these sort of like uh, sound waves that were, or the pressure waves that were created when the tectonic plates were impacting each other and sort of subducting and pushing the mountains up. And of course, like pressure waves and what do we call them, like earthquakes, are actually sound waves, or they are in fact like creating sound, because all vibration is sound. And so this kind of like pressure that created the mountains was in fact like sound itself. And so there's a series of processes that kind of cue you into that idea of the way that those sound waves would have like kind of impacted your body in a big way, or like sort of like in this like kind of massive vibration, and created these mountains. There's symbols that kind of talk about this like fading out of sound that's happening now, in the area where we're seeing like less diversity of species in Banff, and more human sound. And as there's more human sound, there's less sort of diversity of other sounds. There's all of these studies about, birds kind of along roadsides, not being able to kind of communicate with each other and that disrupting their life cycle and all of this. The Dawn score sort of really tries to situate listening within like kind of cueing you into how to kind of listen beyond a sort of human framework to the environment. And then the Dusk score really cues you into how to engage with the environment through sound. So how to kind of participate within like a kind of symphonic piece that's happening there. So it actually kind of cues you more into like listening and harmonics and that are happening within the environment. And then on the back, I really wanted to think about, the piece itself. Like the audio piece exists, and there are ways to listen to it, or, when it was installed in the amphitheater, you could listen to it. But I wanted to think about that amphitheater again as this kind of like political space, or this space of gathering, this space of change, this space of possibility, of like ending up kind of like rehearsal. Like we can kind of come into this space and think about how to shift our relationship to the environment. So text on the back is written as like a play script, kind of like a piece of theater. And it's written in a series of acts, and the acts actually cue you into these different processes of listening as well, and sort of like talk through why, or like sort of like some of the processes that have been happening. And the idea is that you can take the script and kind of perform it yourself, even just by being present in the amphitheater. So like this, not that you even necessarily have to make any sounds, but just by the act of listening within the amphitheater, you're performing the score. And so yeah, that takes you through these kind of different processes, and kind of brings you from dawn till dusk, like over the course of this day of listening, in the Bow Valley.
was wondering if there was any tangible engagement between the sounds and the, for example, birds that are actually living in that environment, or if that was something that you had the chance to notice. If there was any sort of back and forth in terms of like more than human participants with the
I think
score.
what was such a beautiful part of the experience of that work was that you both had an opportunity to take in the audio as a multi-channel work in that space. But because it was ambient and installed outdoors, you were also always listening also to the sounds of other people around you, to the sounds of animals that you might hear. You might hear the train, which is also noted in the actual text score.
Yeah, the train, part of the train harmonics, like the harmony of the train, I was trying to kind of amplify like at certain points that's like amplified within the sound work. And at some points the sound work is more dominant in the space, like it's going to be louder and echoing that idea of this kind of like human-made sounds that are dominating the environment. And then at other times it's really very much just like kind of a gentle like drone underneath or like a sort of like amplifying the other sounds that are there. At a certain point, we were able to perform the score at Gather Listen Here. Uh, People joined at dusk in the amphitheater and we performed it. And as we were performing the score all together, the idea is like the assembly if people could perform it because it is just processes. So we just asked people, I say we because it was my partner and I that did it. She's a choral leader, so she was able to kind of wrangle everybody as we were kind of performing this piece together and kind of like sitting in this space of listening and sound making and the kind of like in between space of that. The lightning kicked up in the background and there was like lightning moving between the clouds and over the mountains and it was like threatening rain and it just felt like such a moment of like I think just being present in that space. I think it's very easy in Banff to be like sort of in awe of the space, but not necessarily to just for me to be present in it. So it was such a magic moment.
Oh, it was so incredible. It was so incredible.
Yeah, that question of how to listen, like I was reading Dylan Robinson's like really incredible book about like sort of settler listening, hungry listening, thinking about how to listen non-extractively, like thinking about how to listen without kind of taking information. And even just like in terms of being in a place like Banff, you go in and you're like not wanting to also just like name every sound that I heard in a kind of like taxonomical way of being like, oh, that's a such and such bird. Like this is a like just to kind of actually try to be present beyond the idea of bringing a settler extractive ear, I guess, in a way. And a lot of that led me to this kind of question around, when we listen to something and our bodies engage with those sound waves, our bodies are also like vibrating in response. And so, in a way, like we can't necessarily listen to something without like responding and like making, perhaps even sounding in response. How do we listen without just being without taking and like how do we kind of understand our like reciprocity in listening?
Listening devices as a whole is really intended as an invitation to think about the relationship between sound, listener, and location, as well as an invitation to experience and think alongside a long-term kind of history of sound-based practice at BAM Center or works that are activating a relationship between sound, listener, and location in different ways. There are a number of different ways that you can engage with works within the exhibition. Two works by Rebecca Belmore that are sound-based works are available to actually stream off of the exhibition website. Rebecca Belmore's Amy Watch Your Mama One speaking to their mother, as well as Lake Minnewanca's shoreline in Banff National Park, heard through wave sound. Janet Cardiff's work Forest Walk is an audio walk taking the form of sound work that you can stream on the website, so you can experience that remotely wherever you are, but there's also the invitation to actually take part in the sound walk if you're at BAM Center. Raven Chacon's score background music is available as a PDF on the website. Lou Sheppard's work, as we've shared about, is available at the Paul D. Fleck Library and Archives at BAM Center. And then C. Swice and Anne Riley's soundtrack for the Radical Love of Butterflies is available in person at BAM Center on cassette tape. And you can book a time to experience the work through Calendly through the website and then actually check out the work in person. A number of different ways to experience works in the exhibition, whether you're able to be on campus physically or interested in engaging with work remotely.
Thank you to today's guests on Ears Have Eyes, Jacqueline Bell and Lou Sheppard. We look forward to next month's continued exploration of devices for listening, sound sculptures, and sculptural sounds.